We're now live, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Place Scrutiny meeting for the 13th of July, Thursday, the 13th of July. If I can immediately kickstart with the headlines from the agenda, please. To start off with, do we have any substitutes for present this evening? And apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we have Councillor Blackborough substituting for Councillor Caffrey, and obviously apologies from Councillor Caffrey. Right,
smashing. Thank you very much indeed. Item 2 is members' interests. To remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interest they might have in relation to the items included on this agenda, which can be either declared now or as the interest becomes more apparent during the course of the discussion. I'm okay with that. And moving on to item 3 with the admission of the public. Well, we're being streamed on live on YouTube. Welcome to the people who are watching the live stream. Item 4 on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of June to be agreed as a correct record and signed virtually, I suppose, by the chair. Do we have anyone willing to propose those minutes from the last meeting? Thank you, Councillor Kimber. It's a dreadful moment there. Anyone second? Thank you, Councillor Foster, and all those in favour? Yes, let's have some hands. Thank you, thank you. And any against? Or any comments? Any comments to make on the minutes? No, right, excellent. Good, and moving on to right, before we get too carried away into the main body of the work this evening, we'll be starting very shortly with the regeneration and strategy service plans and priorities presentation. And hopefully you've all read the report from the director, Sheila. Where are you? There you are, Sheila. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. But before we do, just in terms of housekeeping, if you wish to make a comment, especially for members, if you could raise your hand using the raise hand icon, please, because it does mean you will come up in order onto the top left-hand corner of my screen, so I can deal with you in order. Otherwise, I'd like to say good evening to Sheila and the other officers present. And yeah, if you want to start the ball rolling, please, it'd be good to hear from you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. I think I've met most people, but for those who don't know me, I'm Sheila O'Neill, Director of Regeneration and Strategy. I'm afraid the team's a little bit depleted this evening. I think I'm either working them too hard or they've had enough because they're either on holiday, and unfortunately Kate's been taken ill. She's got perforated eardrum, so she won't be joining us this evening. I do, however, have with me Amy Jenkinson, who's our policy intern this year, and she's working with us on the inclusive economy work in particular. And so she will participate in the session that's coming after the EV charging item. So I'll do a very short introduction so that we've got time for questions and comments and observations on the work of the Directorate. Just to be clear, I did follow the format that was used by Ian Day, Director of Public Services, because I know that worked for the meeting. I did watch the meeting back, and I wanted to follow up on a couple of the items that were discussed at that meeting, just to acknowledge that they've been addressed. So I know Councillor Foster, you raised an issue around the furnishings within social housing providers. That's an issue that the team have picked up and we are following through, and it will be raised at a meeting next week with registered providers around retaining, where possible and appropriate, furnishings and carpets and so on, where tenants may benefit from that action. So we're looking at trying to review that policy and work with partners to do that.
Thank you for your email on that one too, Sheila. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. And then further to that, I know that there was a question about Halifax Leisure Centre, and members will be aware that there was an update on the Leisure Centre at Cabinet on Monday and a press release. So I'm not anticipating that there'll be a great deal of further information I can give beyond that, but happy to answer questions if I can. And then finally, after the main body of the meeting, when you were discussing the work programme, I noted that there was a discussion about future items around housing standards, biodiversity net gain and habitat bank, and they're items that we would suggest were considered by scrutiny as well. So that was helpful. So back to the report itself. I'm not going to go through in detail, as I said. I have followed the format that was set at the previous meeting, and I thought it was helpful to give that overview of services. It is a very broad directorate, and there's some quite significant work areas in there. In some councils, you would find housing had its own service area. Housing actually sits within economy, housing and investment. So we've got a real mix of scales across the teams and the service functions. Just on the portfolio holder arrangements, we do now have, following the May cabinet changes, we have 6 portfolio holders working across the directorate. So Councillor Dacre on skills and Catherine and markets and so on. Councillor Scullion has retained the strategic regen and the strategic planning brief. Councillor Lynn is covering operational highways across the Directorate of Regeneration and Strategy and Public Services. Councillor Patient's brief has been expanded with the active travel and strategic transport brief, and the BCS element of the work that Councillor Patient did with us previously has gone to Councillor Courtney, who also picks up the town's agenda, and a slightly expanded brief there too. And Councillor Swift has retained Halifax Town Centre and still chairs the Halifax Town Board. So quite a diverse set of services and quite a diverse set of portfolio holder arrangements as well. And I think that's either a sign that we're doing something right or possibly doing something wrong, but it works well, so that's good. I think what I've tried to do is capture some of the areas that the Scrutiny has looked at historically in the last year or so, and particularly focusing on the work that Scrutiny did to support the Directorate, and in particular the planning service around the service improvement plan. And we would really, really hope that that can continue. We do have a scheduled date to come back in August. The team have found that really helpful, and I hope that the committee have too. We're still on that improvement journey. I'm pleased to report that we're performing very well and way above threshold at the moment, but I still think it's important that members have sight of that, and I know that government have appreciated the fact that we've had that level of profile. Further to that, we've got the EV charging item tonight that Councillor Patient and Mary Farrer and Laura Bramley will be covering around the infrastructure arrangements of the work on Levi in particular, and they'll cover that in more detail this evening. We've got a brief item this evening on the inclusive economy strategy refresh, and that's for members who are new. They may or may not be aware that we did have an inclusive economy strategy. There was also the recovery plan that was pulled together during COVID to respond to those particular economic issues. And now we're looking to refresh the main strategy for 2024. And I would recommend that we bring that back at a later date, because this is really the outset of that piece of work. It's a really important piece of work, and I think it's something that we would benefit from having the insight of members, and also that would be of interest to you and certainly relevant to the Place Scrutiny agenda. I'm aware that there's been a request for highways maintenance and management programme. I think that would be really helpful. Obviously, there was a highways review in 2018, and the teams work across the Directorates of Public Services and Regeneration and Strategy. And as I said, that has been brought together under portfolio holder Councillor Lynn, and we're working to streamline and increase efficiency there. So I think that's a really helpful item that we'd like to bring forward on the agenda. As I said before, the housing item, remains a key issue for us. We still have challenges around delivery. The adoption of the local plan will help, but the market is challenging, and we've only got to look at the cost of living crisis, the impact of inflation on construction, and the impact on mortgage rates at the moment, and what that does to the housing market. So not all of the issues that we have to deal with in the Directorate and the Council are within our gift to change, but what we try and do is create the conditions and intervene where we can, where we have the powers and the ability to do so. There are other areas that, having spoken to the team about areas where we think it would be beneficial to really get some additional input, and I've singled those out in paragraph 3 within the report. I'm suggesting we've got the voluntary and community social enterprise strategy development. You'll be aware that we had the fair funding review that came to scrutiny, I think 2 municipal years ago. So that strategy is in development at the moment, and we will be commissioning some work. I would really recommend that the Place Scrutiny are cited on that piece of work in particular. Members, I know you questioned Ian last meeting around the investment in housing standards and the enforcement officers in particular. I think the work in housing standards and building safety more generally is a really important area of work at the moment that will remain important and is prioritised by ourselves and government, and would really welcome further scrutiny from the committee in that work area. I've also recommended that we have an item on strategic transport planning. It's an area that's quite complex. It's both dynamic and slow moving at the same time, if it can be that. And I was just recommending that we have an item that covers the suggested areas around mass transit, bus reform and rail improvements, and that we do that in conjunction with our partners at West Yorkshire Combined Authority, because those programmes are largely led by West Yorkshire, and we have to make sure that Calderdale's interests are best represented and reflected in those programmes. And further to that, I've included again the local plan and supplementary planning documents. So you will all be aware the local plan was adopted. You will all no doubt be aware that there's been a challenge to that, and we're still in the process of waiting to hear whether or not that will be dismissed or there will be a date set for that to be heard. But the work continues. The process in that situation is that the work continues. So there are a number of supplementary planning documents that are really quite important that we think it will be good for the committee to be cited on, either in this stage where they're in consultation or as we're scoping the work. So at the moment we've got the affordable housing, the custom and self-build SPDs, the spatial planning documents, the placemaking SPD, and we will be moving forward on the Gypsy and Traveller SPD and Show People SPD, which I know it will be of interest to the committee. The other item that I didn't put on the report, but that I think might be of interest and is covered in the inclusive economy work, is around the visitor economy strategy, which is being refreshed in advance of the Year of Culture for 2024. So they were the main items that I thought might be of interest to the committee, but happy to take questions and answer wherever I can. And if I can't answer this evening, I'm more than happy to come back to the committee with a more detailed response. I don't know if any of them, I can't see everybody on the screen, so I'm not sure if any of the portfolio holders would like to contribute anything to the introduction.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sheila. I'd like to welcome the opportunity for any portfolio holders to come in. Councillor Patience here, I know he got name checked a bit earlier on, but no, I can't see anybody else. Scott, did you want to come in and contribute anything at this point, or do you prefer to wait for questions?
I'm happy to wait for questions at this point. I think Sheila sort of covered it quite well, really, and she made reference earlier to the bio-net gain sort of aspects of things, and I think it's really important that we come back and have a sort of wider conversation about what that means for us as an authority and how policy change both here and development of that as a supplementary planning document might work. Sorry, forgot what else you said at that point, Sheila. There's definitely, as Sheila said, sorry, some challenges around the housing agenda, and I know that's something we keep coming back to sort of around every 6 months or so, and whether that's enforcement or management of empty homes or, you know, the private rented sector or proliferation of Airbnbs. There's tons we could talk about, I think, on that agenda. So happy really to be led by you guys. Sheila, is there anything I missed on there?
No, I think when I met with the chair and the deputy chair and Mike, the discussion around housing was that they're probably looking at doing a scrutiny in a day, I think, on housing. But I think there is such a breadth to cover around housing that I did wonder whether or not the building safety work and the housing standards was a standalone item that would benefit from having a separate report, just because there's so much happening on the housing agenda more broadly, but happy to take a steer from the committee on that. Obviously the agenda gets quite full, doesn't it? And I know we struggled on some meetings in previous years with having too many items, especially when we brought partners in. It was quite challenging. I did just want to flag though that Councillor Courtney is on the call, and she was planning to join, but has gone to a recital, so she's not got a camera, but she is here. And I know she particularly wanted to be here for the inclusive economy refresh item because she's going to take up the chair of the board. So I don't know if Councillor Courtney wants to say anything either.
I don't think she's going to be able to come in at this moment, but I think she'll definitely be able to lead on the inclusive economy stuff, like in a while.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. Yes, the biodiversity is going to be of interest, I'm sure. I'd be interested to see what that's going to look like in due course. But before we do, I'd like to open up to members, and already Councillor Bradbury has got a hand up. So Yes, Councillor Blackburn, do you want to open the batting, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think that this has been an extremely useful report to get a better understanding of the whole remit of the department. So thank you, Sheila, for that information. That's really useful. I think it will be really useful as well to send out the list of portfolio holders as to what they're specifically engaged with. I think that will be extremely useful. I have a specific one in relation to CAFAM, and it relates to the Brighouse Civic Hall, actually, as to progress, and it's something you'll probably need to take away and provide us with an update. It has been, you know, it's been on the cards to try and dispose of the building. I know it's a complex building, but it will be. I would very much appreciate an update at some stage. That'd be most kind. But other than that, really excellent report, given how much work you actually do. So thank you, Sheila, for that.
Thank you, Councillor Blackburn. And the challenge was what to take out, and I think really, so it isn't representative of the work of all the teams or all the work of all the teams, but I just thought it gave a flavour of things that might be relevant for place scrutiny. Just on Brighouse Civic Hall, we've obviously had some unsuccessful attempts to bring that into community ownership, you know, with the brass band interest in particular and theatre groups and so on. I hesitate to say it, but I've actually just received a report this week around the options for Brighouse Civic Hall that I'm looking at the moment. I haven't discussed it with the portfolio holders and I've got to meet with the team. So we are looking at what the options are for Brighouse Civic Hall, and obviously there are tensions between the fact that we've got income generating shops underneath, and then we've got this vacant space that's quite challenging to occupy. So we've had an external piece of work around the potential uses and the optimum way forward for the council, looking at both income and risk, and we will be coming forward with that in the coming weeks and months. So it is moving, which I think is positive.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed for that. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'm interested in housing. So I'm wondering about the empty houses. It says take action to sort of improve or reduce the number of empty houses. I'm just wondering what's happened so far and how are you going about it to improve the number of reduce the number of empty houses? How long do you think that will take to do?
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Can I, sorry, before you answer that, Sheila, can I jump in with a supplementary to that as well? Because there was one of the questions that I was going to ask about as well, was the number of empty properties, not just with regard to the housing associations, but do we have any kind of clue as to how many empty houses we've got in private hands as well? Just to add muddy.
Yeah,
because I think we have. I think Steph and myself have a similar interest in this area. In order to augment her question a bit further.
We do. So in response to that, I'm just trying to look at the empty home strategy, see if the numbers in it, but the number changes. Now, it doesn't change by thousands in any given year, because obviously it's one of the problems is that it's quite static, is the empty home situation really. It is in the thousands. We have one officer, Eileen, who works really hard. She's got about 0.6. It's not even a full-time post. It's about 0.6. And this is an area that Councillor Patient and I have been having conversations about doing more. The challenge with empty homes is that it is not a crime to leave a home empty. People are entitled to do that. We have very limited opportunities to intervene. So we can intervene when it's causing a nuisance or blight or is problematic to neighbours. But it's quite expensive to do so. It's quite time consuming. So we look at trying to do encouraging really people to bring their homes back into use. It may well be that if houses are not mortgaged, there is no incentive to bring them back into use. I think the increase in mortgage interest rates may well prompt some homeowners, second home or third home owners, or people who've got empty properties to bring them back into use. But empty homeowners are an interesting section of the community, because they're really quite complex to try and get to the bottom of how you can move that issue along. So we are working on it. We've had some really good successes in recent times. We do follow CPO processes when the situation's right and we think it's the right thing to do. I've just met with, as a result of the work around housing standards, I'm the strategic lead for the council. So the enforcement team sit within public services. And so after the we've always worked together and the teams work together well. But after the award of the additional funds in the budget for this financial year, I chair a group that's a cross-cutting group, which includes building control, it includes my housing teams, and it includes Derek Ben and the enforcement teams from there. And one of the things we're looking at is how much work we can do at the beginning of the housing chain, if you like. So trying to be much more proactive and less reactive. So the empty homes agenda is part of that, because bringing good quality empty homes back into use is really helpful in the housing market. So we do have a live empty home strategy, which I'll circulate to the committee. I think the challenge is it's time consuming, it's expensive, and we have limited tools to be able to do it, because unless there is blight or a problem, then it's really difficult to act, because an Englishman's home is his castle. You know, the property laws in this country are very old, and they protect the individual. But we do work in a way to encourage, and that's the way that, you know, the whole of the enforcement agenda works across Calderdale, around educating and encouraging before we move to enforcement. But we will enforce if we need to.
It's probably worth adding on that as well, that, you know, I mean, Sheila's just made reference to the fact that we've got one officer working on that. I think it's probably true to say that we could have a fleet of officers, around 20 of them working on the agenda, and we probably won't get much, we probably won't achieve much quicker action on it. Again, I wouldn't be able to track those because that's a hypothetical, but I think hopefully what Sheila sort of just told you in terms of what we can and can't do with legislation and the sort of current lay of the land, and I actually don't even think legislation would make it that more easier to make changes. But it's probably worth splitting it in two and thinking private rented is one section, but also working with RRPs and sort of you know, social housing providers is another. Actually, their turnaround on getting empty homes back into use is pretty good, and they're getting better at it all the time, and that's thanks to ward councillor intervention, you know, our relationship with them on the Together Housing Investment Partnership, and the wider sort of partnership we've got with RRPs. But it's always worth, and I would always encourage ward councillors, if anything comes to you in terms of local intelligence about one of their homes being or at least even looking like it's not in use, to make sure that's reported, because they have been, to my sort of knowledge, quite proactive in responding to that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there is a premium on empty homes, so the council tax increases, and I've been asking council tax for some of the information around that, because perversely, council tax premium payers tend to be better payers. So it's peculiar. There's a real kind of disconnect there between what should be a tool to bring back into use actually doesn't seem to work in that way. But it is an area that we're interested in, and it is an area that we think is really important that we maintain a really strong focus on. And I have to say, Eileen's a very good officer, and one of the things that makes a really good empty homes officer is that they're persistent, and they are certainly persistent, I can assure you.
Thank you. Sorry, just a point of clarification, or 2 points of clarification, one from Scott, one from Sheila. When you say thousands of empty homes, is that something like 1,800, or is it more like 8,100?
No, it's around 2,400.
Yeah, I'm just looking for the exact figure, but I can't open the attachment.
I found it, Sheila,
you
didn't have to. It's 2,410, I think, at the moment.
Right, brilliant. Thank you for that. And the second point of clarification from Scott really is, yeah, you say reporting in empty homes. Who do you recommend reporting that to?
I mean, in the first instance, if it's not obvious who the RP is or who the sort of social housing provider is, then that's something you can either send to a housing officer within the council or myself, who can do that tracking for you.
Yeah. I mean, this has got over and above the rental sector, though. I'm thinking about, you know, empty freeholds, you know, which are just sitting there idle.
Again, there's a sort of centralised point. You can do civic inquiries to Together Housing if you think that that's the one, or you can get in touch with any of the officers there just to figure that out.
Okay, yeah. I mean, as I think it cross refers with the council tax as well, doesn't it? So
and we are trying to do some work on council tax and business rates databases. There was some work done several years ago that never progressed, and I think it would be very useful, and it would particularly help us. It helps with empty homes, because demonstrating that a home is empty, you've got to prove it's empty, but it would also help us with understanding which homes are in the private rented sector and who the landlord owner is. So we're trying to work with Tony and the team, Tony Kershaw and the team, to get those improvements and changes made to our data systems, because that would save us an awful lot of time and give us some really good quality data.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, Councillor Foster.
Thank you. Yeah, linked to what we've just been talking about with empty homes, I'd very much welcome an update on the house that was CPO'd off King Cross Street a good while ago now. It would be wonderful to know sort of whether or not that is now being lived in, and whether that CPO has actually been effective and has brought the house back into use, because it's quite a good benchmark, if you like, as to sort of how that process works, whether it works well, and what we can potentially do to improve it. I'd also love to know about empty shops, because I don't know if that's really strictly speaking the same remit, but there's an awful lot of empty shops where it is nigh on impossible to find out who to go to try and rent that shop. If you wanted to set up a business in that, you see a premises, you think, oh, that's empty, it's not being used, it would be perfect for what I want to do. Who do I go to? I have no idea. And I don't think, and half the time it's really, really difficult to find that information, particularly if there's not sort of an obvious to let board or anything like that out the front of the shop. So some sort of clarity over how we manage that process, if there is any clarity over it to be had, because I appreciate it's distinctly complex. And the third thing I'd love to know about, which is rather linked to CAFM really, it used to be pre-COVID, members of the public could come and have a look around Halifax Town Hall, which is a fabulous building and well worth a visit, but it is by no means clear how that is even possible anymore. It used to just be open to the public, and now it isn't, because we've had security lockdown since COVID, and those measures seem to have been taken sort of in place. So even if it's not possible to sort of open it up on a permanent basis anymore, is there any way we could look at sort of having guided tours twice a week, or some sort of more formalized structure, so that members of the public can go and see the town hall, and particularly during events like Heritage Week, and taking into account all the people that visit over the summer, whether linked to the Peace Hall and the festivals there, and so on and so forth. So I think we're missing a trick really with not opening the town hall, because it's a glorious building. There's a fabulous amount of history there. Yes, it does take a little bit of managing to show people around, but I'm sure we can manage it between us. So I'd love to have a look into those three things, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Foster. Can I just clarify, because I think I got two things, so I just want to double check. So the ownership of empty shops, if it's causing a problem, we can do a land registry search and try and find out. We don't offer that as a service because there is a charge and it takes time and it's not cost effective. So any member of the public can do that, and it's a couple of pounds. So what we don't want to get into the routine of doing is doing them for everybody and anybody. But people can do that land registry search. But it can be tricky, because even if you find the owner, they may well have some convoluted arrangement around how it's leased and managed and so on. So it's understand those challenges. But we are looking, as we're looking at housing and the town centres, we are looking at vacant properties as well. So especially where there's an opportunity for residential or for a contribution to the high street that's not currently being manifest, if you like. So we are interested in all the property issues more generally. With regards to the town hall, this was before my time, and so I'm not going to name names because I won't get them wrong, but the the visits and the tours of the town hall were operated by legal services, I think, or the mayor's office, or public services. They were not part of the CAFM offer, so we've never had resources CAFM to do that. I know that there have been tours because I've seen them. So the events team have on Heritage Week supported and facilitated those sorts of tours and worked with a former member of the Business Improvement District. So that's something I will take back. It is something that comes up periodically, and I know that the challenge is around how cost effective it is, but one of the discussions we're having is, as a public building, it isn't very accessible. So I will take that back because it has been raised before. And I'm not sure what the third thing was, Councillor Foster, I'm afraid. Oh, the CPO at Cross Street. I will look that up.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
One at King Cross.
Yeah. And one of the things we talked about today was the importance of case studies, not just for the CPO process, but also where we work with landlords around improving conditions for residents and tenants. So we are looking at case studies. So I will flag that as an opportunity and report back on that particular case anyway.
Right, thank you for that. Just very quickly, I made an inquiry myself about tours of Halifax Town Hall. They are usually undertaken by the Halifax Heritage Group. Their website is halifaxheritage.co.uk, and there's a contact link on there as well. Yeah, have a go with that. I got in touch with tourism at Calderdale to find that information out. So I don't know if that will help you. But moving swiftly on, we're back to Councillor Blackburn, please. Then
yeah, thank you, Jay. You won't be inviting me back to this meeting. My apologies. Two things. Certainly, in my civic advisory role, I'd certainly welcome the town hall to be reopened. I think it's really important, and whether we could potentially perhaps part of the CAFM request is actually having a fob to the rooms, so that the rooms have a lock, so that actually people could actually walk into the Victoria Hall without having to go anywhere else. So I know it may be a cost, but it's something I'm very strongly of the opinion. That wasn't actually my question. So thank you, Councillor Foster, for raising that. That's really important. My question relates to empty homes when they've been empty for a period of time, and when they go back on the market and somebody hopefully buys it but needs the time to actually renovate the property. Under the current scheme, I understand that they are liable for the double rate of council tax. I'm just wondering whether we can look into the feasibility of some a special dispensation for those that are renovating a house that's been empty for more than 2 years.
I'll come back and clarify that point, Councillor Blackburn, because it has come up before. So I will clarify that point.
Thank you for that. Councillor Holdsworth.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on Councillor Foster and her point about the Town Hall, and Councillor Blackbur's. I wondered if it would be possible for one of the heritage experts, and we've got 2 or 3 of them in Calderdale, to do a recording of the Town Hall, the audio headphones and the sets you get if you go to somewhere like the Tate, that you can put them on and they take you around without any need for a human being to do that. I wondered if that might be a more cost-effective way of allowing people into the building. The usual story, a deposit for the headsets and the earphones. When you return them, you get your money back. Obviously, we'd have to make sure that offices that were in use were not part of the tour, but if we could work out something like that, I think that would bring people into the town hall and introduce the public to the building without the need for somebody to be present, because I think you can trust people to actually go around and look at architectural interest, art interests, and all the fantastic parts of the town hall that we have. So maybe that might be a way forward. It's just a suggestion.
Thank you, Councillor Holdsworth. Do you know, one of the, I'm on the Year of Culture Executive Board, and we're meeting on Monday morning, and one of the strands of the Year of Culture is heritage, and obviously heritage is absolutely, it's hugely significant for Calderdale. But I will put that suggestion forward, because that may well be a nice project as part of the run up to the Year of Culture and accessing buildings. So I will put that forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sheila. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you again, Chair. Right, this is about tourism as well. I'm just going to tell you a tiny story. This morning I had a call from a resident who lives in Illingworth. They're having some visitors from America, and they are wanting to show them around Halifax, obviously the Peace Hall, etc., etc. They also wanted to show them the gibbet because they've heard about it. So before those visitors come, they went over to the gibbet to have a look at it, to see what they could sort of show them. And while they were there, they picked up 5 bags of rubbish. And if we are going to be a tourism destination, we need to keep the place clean and tidy, and particularly in areas that are of particular interest on a heritage trail. And another thing I think was about the grass around it, which was very, very untidy. It just looked really, really scruffy. And they took it upon themselves to litter pick it.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I will report that. I'm delighted to say that Cleaner Green Services sit with Ian Day, my colleague in Public Services, and I will feed that back to him. But I think the point's really valid. But I also think the point about the community engaging and supporting is really helpful, because it's a shared responsibility, isn't it? You know, the council doesn't go around dropping litter. It's a shared community responsibility. So, but I will feed that back to Ian and make sure that it's fed in. We do have regular conversations. I speak to a lot of businesses who will talk to me about the approach to business parks. I know we've talked on this at this meeting about gateways into the borough and how important they are. So it's all part of creating the conditions, and I will absolutely feed that back. You're absolutely right. It's an important impression, isn't it? And it is an important heritage point. So I will feed that back to Ian Day, my colleague.
Yeah.
Right, thank you very much indeed. I've got a few questions, but before I weigh in, are there any other members who wish to make any contributions before I do? And then on the assumption there's nothing that gets picked up on the back of those questions, we'll then move on to the I think it's the
wants to talk.
Ah, sorry, yeah, Scott, please do.
It was just a very brief point, and one that I forget who it was that brought up, and I just noticed the way the conversation developed there. And someone asked earlier about a list of portfolio and who does what within what areas, and that might have helped guide tonight's discussion about, you know, who could and couldn't answer what. So it's not a knock. I guess it's just a sort of check about making sure that that's something that can be perhaps distributed to place membership, so they're very clear about who does what.
Yeah, fair point.
As the patient, I'm very happy to passport other people's work to them. It's the ideal outcome in a meeting like this.
True.
Right, okay. Right, in terms of the report, thank you very much indeed. The few bits and pieces that I wanted to mention. In 2.3.3, employment skills and adult education, providing learning programs for adults to improve their knowledge, skills, well-being and employment opportunities. The prospectus came through my letterbox the other day for all the adult education classes, which was great to see. I had a flick through, half hoping to find some coding classes, maybe for something like Python or something of that order. They weren't there. There were some excellent looking classes for getting to grips with the basics of IT. So just as a suggestion, I'm wondering, you know, moving forward in terms of developing skills for employability, whether there's something along the lines of coding for starting from level 0 for coding and right up to almost prepping for up to employment level, I suppose, just as a suggestion. Yeah, there's obviously it's where you draw the line in terms of offering courses for folks, but I thought that might be a useful one.
Yeah, I will feed that back, Councillor Dickinson. And I think one of the challenges is making sure that we can get the numbers on the courses to make them viable and sustainable. But I will absolutely feed that back to Grant and the team. If there's an appetite for it in the community, then we should be looking at what we can do to meet that. Yeah,
understood. Thank you very much indeed. Touching very briefly on the Halifax swimming pool, I was speaking to a resident in Ellen some while ago, and I'm guessing the horse has bolted on this particular idea. was that yes, the old swimming pool has deteriorated, but there is a very significant footprint there, which could be reused perhaps more cheaper than digging fresh holes in the ground. I was wondering if that still might potentially be an option for consideration. It struck me as being a good idea, but as I say, that horse may have bolted by now.
The former swimming pool site.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be suitable, Councillor Dickinson. It's not a very large site. The access is quite restricted. We wouldn't be able to. The principle that government have bought into is having that combined leisure facility and pool. Right. The other issue is that the power supply would not be adequate. There's already a need to relocate the substation, so it would be a very costly. It sounds like it feels like it should be an easy answer, doesn't it? But it would actually be very expensive.
No, that's fine. It's a question that was asked, and yeah, so it's good to have that answer. On 2.6.4, let me just put. Oh, hang on. Let me just pull it up. I just clicked the wrong button. Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. I need to get rid of this, otherwise it's going to obscure everything. 2.6.4. Just bear with me. There it is, performance and customer care. I'm guessing that's generally Sarah Richardson's remit, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay. In that case, it might not be the right question that I'm about to ask then, in terms of customer, customers are trying to access customer first. Is that the right area that we're looking at for this?
No, it's not. So customer first sits in public services. So I can understand that this team works very closely with customer services, and Tony has just helped us with recruitment. So this team sits within strategic infrastructure, and you will all be aware through your casework about the volume of inquiries around highways in particular. Right. So that team is a team that deals with all of the highways inquiries. And one of the things that we're prioritising, so you'll be aware of the work that we've been doing with planning and the service improvement plan. And we're also looking at the strategic infrastructure service, and Adrian has been in post now for 9 months, looking at the team structure, looking at the roles and the posts, trying to bring some consistency with our peers across West Yorkshire, but also then looking at how we streamline some of that. The correspondence is very, very significant. And so there is a team dedicated to dealing with that. And what we want to do is try and be more responsive, because you'll be aware that there's an awful lot of unnecessary contacts in that process where people are chasing information that hasn't been provided. So that team is dedicated to dealing with that volume of inquiries, but works on the same principles and supporting the customer service framework that Tony brought to Cabinet last March, I think it was.
Right, Brill. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so I'll drop that one. I don't want to labour this, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. But touching on planning, and I know we'll be coming back to this in more depth, but I thought it might be helpful just put some general comments out, if you wouldn't mind, Sheila.
Yeah, no problem.
With regards to the response to Michael Gove's letter of April, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any thoughts and feedback in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, we understand why government and the Secretary of State had to send that letter. So that letter is based on, there's a data lag. When you're dealing with planning, we know that, there's a timeline and there's a data lag. So that letter was based on the performance that we'd already identified was below par. So you will recall when I think one of my first meetings in that municipal year of 21-22, I'd come in and was looking at the housing delivery issues, and because we just had the housing delivery test figures, and actually what I found was that the planning service was really struggling, and so we brought in Richard, pulled together a plan to bring in the Planning Officer Society to do that first piece of work, looking at where we had areas of weakness and areas we needed to really bolster and improve. So we already knew, and so this letter is really a delayed kind of confirmation of that performance, which was below the levels it needed to be at. There was a deadline to respond to government tomorrow. We have responded, so we've already had conversations with the civil servants. We've shown them our service improvement plan. We've talked about the work that we've been doing with you, actually, but also with the planning advisory service and some of the training sessions that I'm hoping some of you may have attended around the local plan and the planning process. But I can assure you that I've actually got the performance figures in front of me now. So the minimum level required for non-major applications, which is, so just for members who aren't aware, the issue of performance is not about our major applications, so the big applications, it's about the small applications, which is the high volume of the kind of homeowner extensions, those kinds of things. And that was where we were performing quite badly. I can assure you now the threshold was 70%. We're running at an average of 88%, which is well above target. April to June 2023, we're actually running at 97%. So we're way above target. The letter that we're responding back with is that we believe it's unreasonable. That's the language that government uses. Is it reasonable to designate you? We're saying it's unreasonable. We're saying we're self-aware. We've identified the issues that we need to address. The council has made a financial commitment to enable us to do that work, and it is reaping rewards. We've got a bigger team. We've got some really experienced people. We've had some really fantastic appointments, and we're seeing the benefit of that. It would not give any great advantage to be designated. If I thought it was the right thing for the council and the borough of Calderdale for us to go down that path, then I would accept that as the right thing to do. But actually, I think it's important for Calderdale that it's in control of its own borough, and we're doing all the right things. We're performing at the right level. And just this week, I got a letter, it was an email that I shared with the leader and with Robin, from a developer of Ellen Town Hall, who's doing a scheme there. And he said he's never had such exemplary service from a planning authority in the 20 years he's been developing. And he said that on the basis that he's reduced the number of units in that development by 10%. So he's lost 5 units, which most developers would be banging on the door and complaining about. But he said, having worked with the team, he realised it's the right thing to get the right quality of development for Elland. And this is what this is about. It's not about housing numbers. It's about creating homes for people that are sustainable and long-term. And that's what the team are focused on doing. I'm incredibly proud. I know you know I'm incredibly proud, because I say it every time I come. But the work that they're doing, it is really paying dividends. There's a long way to go, and we've got a backlog that we still have to keep chipping away at. But actually, our performance is very, very good at the moment.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed for that. Councillor Patient.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that very briefly, I mean, Sheila's sort of outlined the kind of timeline of it, and in a way, it came much after already these improvements have been implemented, because of actual discussions we'd had in forums like this, actual discussions we'd had pre-budget, and identifying what was needed, and your experiences as ward councillors of the planning department. And I'm sure, you know, I can certainly remember last year people coming to council and asking questions about having to wait too long. So it was already there, the structures were already in place, the resource was already input there. And I think, and I'm sure if if was to ask any of you individually, that you've noticed the sort of service improvement has like actually gone stratospheric. It's much more fluid at the moment. And for those of you on planning committee, I think you're even probably noticing how that's playing through in that sort of forum, in terms of how stuff's being turned around, in terms of the new faces that you're seeing. So it was good, I think, to raise the issue around it, but actually it was quite late to the party in the fact that we'd already done that work previous. So just worth pointing out.
Great stuff. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Right, moving on to my final one. Now, it's a bit, again, it sticks with planning a little bit, and it was in response to something that got mentioned in 3.3, which is the potential forward work programme, and it was the approach to housing standards and building safety. Not so much necessarily housing standards as building standards, it just triggered the thought. And I'm just wondering if it might be possible for us as a borough to specify efficiency measures, which may be in fact in excess of current building regulations, as it were, future-proofing our housing stock that we're going to be building from now forward, and making that as part of the conditions of planning permission. So, for example, we'll specify more than one electric vehicle charging point per dwelling in houses of a certain size. It makes no particular sense to me that in a 4-bedroom house there's only one electric vehicle charging point. in terms of that sort of thing for future proofing. Do we have that sort of scope as a council to be able to do that, or are we very much hands tied by the building regulations in terms of national legislation?
So I'm going to preempt Councillor Patient on this one and say that future proofing is having fewer journeys by car, whether it's an electric vehicle or otherwise. So I think one of the challenges we've got is building standards. The new building standards are actually a very high standard, and the biggest issue we've got is the existing stock. So the new builds that are coming onto the market, that even the ones that perhaps are not the highest end of the market are at a very high standard compared to the stock that we have across the borough. So I think in terms of our resource and our energies, we really need to be thinking about the existing stock, especially the pre-1919 solid wall construction, terraces and so on. I think the challenge we've got at the moment is that we are still under delivering in housing numbers, in terms of housing numbers, and that's the measure that government uses. So whilst in my previous answer I was saying that quality is what's important, what gets counted by and large is the numbers. So we would need to tread a very fine line about developer interest and about the appetite for development here. That's not to say that we're an easy touch or we compromise. We absolutely don't. And I think if you look at the work that the planning service have been doing, working with public health, using some public health resource around the placemaking SPD, what we're looking at is the whole of the fabric of the community, looking at what are your travel options, how are the houses organised, how do we make the community sustainable on every level, not just in terms of having EV charging, but access to schools and transport and so on. So I think I understand why it might seem like a good idea. I think we would all love some really exemplary passive house developments and really high-end kind of sustainable developments. I think realistically they will probably come through the custom and self-build route, and I don't think they will come. We don't have many very large sites. The garden communities are our biggest sites, and they're a once-in-a-generation opportunity really, and we've seen how challenging that's been. But I just think we need to be ambitious, and we need to try and do more, and we need to encourage and support. But the reality is that building regulation standards are good. They're really good.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Okay, that's enough from me for the time being. So the final word goes to Councillor Foster before we move on.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just got a couple of things that I thought of that would be really useful to have a look at, or maybe to sort of have some investigative work done on. One is street furniture, and the fact that it can really clutter up pavements, pathways and town centres, often with totally unnecessary signs that just get in the way, don't really do anything, or maybe they've been partially altered for a reason, and they don't really actually need to be there anymore, or there's a better way of doing them, or you can maybe attach that sign to a lamppost as opposed to have it as freestanding. I would love us to be able to have a look at that, because it would massively improve the look of our pavements if they're not totally bunged up with bits of clutter that don't need to be there. It would make accessibility a lot better. It would make it much easier for parents to walk along with pushchairs, or people to use wheelchairs or whatever along footpaths if they're not cluttered with stuff that doesn't need to be there. So that's one thought. I'd love it if we could have a quick look at that. And the second one is I don't know if there's anything within the remit of this board, but one thing that really bothers me about the idea of the garden cities is the garden developments, is the fact that the building within that won't be future-proofed. So I mean, it makes absolute sense for every new house that is built within one of the garden suburbs to have solar panels fitted, to have air source heat pumps fitted, and all of those sort of really useful future-proofing sort of measures taken. I doubt very much for a moment that will actually happen, because it will push the cost of them up massively. But it would be really good if we could try and encourage developers to at least do something along those lines. You know, I've got my doubts as to how much we'll get them to do. But even if we could just have that conversation, that would be a really helpful thing, I think, because we do need to think about it. And it's incredibly frustrating that so many brand new houses are built and then they're going to have to be retrofitted by householders with all the things that they should really have been built with in the first place. Even if we can get them to up the level of insulation they put in, that would be a start. But anyway, something for food for thought, I think, that one really, rather than it would be lovely to do it, but can't see
Judging by the flurry of hands, I think someone else is going to answer this question before I
was just going to add to that. I mean, I'm mindful that I'm sort of straying into public services and planning here a little bit, so I guess we'll sort of pass some of those things on. But I guess on the first point, which was around sort of street furniture and stuff, so you may or may not be aware that there's a board ban trial going on in Hebden Bridge at the moment, and you know, that's sort of in its very early stages. Ban's the wrong word. It's a specific set of criteria around managing it, so that's happening at the moment, and you'll be aware that that's been really welcomed by the local disability access forum and stuff. And I think how we manage that and look at what happens within that's going to be really important. Yesterday in Hebden Bridge saw a distinct, you know, reduction in them, but also saw some people still with them in the way. So some of that monitoring and enforcement, and when we come back and look at that, I think will be really important, as well as policy that we've got that will be sort of really helpful as we develop things within the local plan, like the green and healthy streets policy, tree planting, you know, and all of this, some of which will be managed through you know, some of our regeneration projects in big towns like Sorby Bridge and, you know, and in Halifax themselves. And the second bit was about sort of retrofit and the need to not do that, wasn't it? And hopefully these buildings should be as green as they should be from the start. The reality is, Councillor Foster, I think, unfortunately, not every house built is going to be to passive house standard. However, what I've noticed from speaking to developers and house builders is that they are increasingly moving towards, partly because of building regs and partly because that's just where the industry is going, they are moving towards much more sustainable house building, and whether that's having solar panels anyway or not putting in gas as cost-cutting measures, that's a move that we're seeing anyway. And I think where that isn't doable, we do have supplementary planning documents that we can develop that can help with some of that, as well as the review of the local planning, you know, 5 years time. But actually building regs and national policy is moving quite quick. So we might just see by default, when some of these, you know, places are developed, that we're seeing some of that anyway. But I might have missed something, so I'm happy for Sheila to pick up.
Thank you, Councillor Patient. I think coming to Cabinet, the next Cabinet meeting, you'll see the garden communities SPDs for each of the villages. It's worth reading them. I think they're really ambitious. One of the things that the work that we've done in the last 12 months has been to really put pressure on the house builders and the developers and landowners to think bigger and better. And Laura's on the call. She's going to be covering the EV item with Mary and Councillor Patient, but Laura will tell you we've tried really hard to include a district heat network. We really wanted to try and get the infrastructure in a district heat network. For those who don't know, it's a bit like central heating for cities or large developments, and we wanted to do that. It is so hard, and like so many of these massive infrastructure projects, you really need a national lead and some really strong national legislation and funding to make it work. We can't, the danger is we think the house builders can only kind of they hold the ring on this, but in reality they're selling these properties. They've got to be affordable. You know, we want homes for people that are living in Calderdale and want to come and live in Calderdale and want their children to live in Calderdale. So it's no good pricing everybody out of the market. So there's a real tension there, and I think, you know, Laura and colleagues work really hard trying to look at new technologies, and they're working at the moment on the local area energy plan and looking at how we do decarbonise our borough, our place. And it's just incredibly challenging. It feels like we're kind of in between worlds at the moment a little bit. So I think it's good to have that ambition and that optimism for those types of developments. And we've got to keep putting the pressure on, but the reality is it's very challenging.
Thank you. Just before I move on to Councillor Bragmer for the absolute final point on this segment, and I absolutely mean it, Yeah, the heat pumps are mandatory from 2025 in new build, Councillor Foster. Yes, the solar panels will be absolutely lovely. I quite agree with you 100% on that one. The optimum way to use the heat pump technology, as it is with gas condensing boilers, is actually underfloor heating rather than the carbon expensive steel radiators. But again, we don't live in a perfect world. It would be nice to see it incorporated, but at this current stage with building regulations, it isn't. But hey ho. Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies for having to come back in because it was literally to do with the air boards. And certainly was a matter that was discussed at the Adult Health and Social Care Scrutiny Board due to the people with disabilities and managing the whole thing. It was. I must have missed something along the way because it was my understanding that it was going to be revised to look at a wider remit as to getting out amongst the whole of Calderdale. It's something I really want to push because certainly it is extremely challenging for somebody in a wheelchair in Big House, for instance, to actually get around these air boards. Because, and they seem to be expanding rather than reducing. So just my plea really is to please can we re-look and look towards making it borough wide, even if it's an experimental at this moment in time. And that's my biggest plea as the chair of the Adult Health and Social Care Scrutiny Board. And that is my final word. Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Right, without any further ado, before anyone else jumps in, we're moving on to the electric vehicle infrastructure report. And I believe, sorry, Sheila, who did you say was going to be presenting that?
So, I know Councillor Patient, Mary and Laura should all be, Laura and Mary should be here, Mary Farrer and Laura Bramley.
Right, lovely. So,
I think I have a presentation to share unless one of the officers do. I think I've been asked to share the presentation, but I'll need to be given admin rights to do that. Is that right? Let me just check if I can. Sorry, I'm just fiddling with the. Let me have a look. I'm not sure I have the facility to at this point.
Can you just share screen?
Hold on. No, it's kind of important that we have this really.
And Diane not give you those right.
I'm just looking to see if I can find the presentation we're talking about. Is it IES Refresh?
No, that's the next item.
Oh, right. Sorry, that's the only presentation I've been sent at the moment. Let me see.
Ben's got it.
Yeah, I can share the presentation.
Can you share it? That's great. That's
Thank
great.
you, Ben.
Thank you. Disaster averted.
Good.
So, yeah, I'll wait for you to pull that up. And do I have to fill time now?
You should be able to see this.
We can't see it yet. I mean, I've got it up on my screen. I can try and share.
I'm sure it's going. There we go. Okay, everyone. So I'm just going to introduce this, which is about the electric vehicle infrastructure and the Levi funding and kind of where we're at. I know Place Scrutiny we're interested on what was going on with this and what our strategy was and how that may or may not be in lockstep with West Yorkshire and how it compares to what's going on elsewhere. Laura Bramley, who works in environmental projects and has done loads of technical work on this, is here with us, as is Mary Farrer, who a lot of you will know, who works in the highways team and has also been developing this project. So next slide, I'll just do the first two to set the scene, and then I'll let officers come in and sort of guide you through some of the more technical details. So this has been developed obviously because we need it, and we need to have that infrastructure in place to have the confidence for users and EV car drivers and those that aren't yet EV car drivers or users to be able to have confidence in pickup and know that there's a network there to support them. You may or may not be aware of the 2021 Transport Decarb Plan and the Net Zero Strategy. If you're not, it's easily available online. It's a weighty tome, but there's some interesting stuff in there. And this is all off the back of the government's pledge to be net zero by 2050. You'll note that the government, like us, declared a climate emergency, so that's sort of national policy. And you can see the trajectory there around decarbonising transport and the projections, what COVID did to it, and somewhat stalled some of that work, and some of the carbon savings there. This was a delivery plan for the 6th carbon budget, so in association with the Committee on Climate Change, and it's about having a pathway to fully decarb. So next slide. So that's the national context, and the local context is members may or may not be aware of what's now known as the Climate Action Partnership, formerly the Cabinet Working Party, Climate Change Cabinet Working Party, of which is in the process of developing a climate action plan, and hopefully will be going to the Climate Action Partnership on Monday for sign off, having gone out to public consultation. The areas on there are around green economy, around buildings and warm and resilient buildings, around land and nature, shared voice, and also transport and getting around. So it's a key component for us in Calderdale about that. And a lot of the comments were about not just, obviously, we're going to be talking about tonight, access to EV infrastructure and making sure that we have the confidence for the user around that, and that we've got the structures in place to support it. But moving on to things like active travel, electric buses, thinking about walking and cycling and the opportunities to do things like that. So you'll see there that transport is the second biggest area of carbon emissions, and 41% of our emissions come from our roads, and that's all the vehicles using the roads, except for cars, obviously, except for bikes, obviously. So tackling traffic and pollution means that we need to make sure there are different transport choices, and that's going to mean that people are able to use different options, really. And one of the key actions in there that was picked out specifically, and we're going to be discussing on Monday as the final plan is developed and hopefully signed off, is to make sure that electric vehicle charging is accessible and affordable. So I'm going to invite Mary and Laura to present the slides from here on in, if that's okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Farrer, and I'm the corporate lead for transportation. The responsibility for delivering electric vehicle sits with me and my team. So yeah, the next slide, please. Ben, thank you. Currently, over 1 in 5 new cars sold have a plug. That was from December 2022, with a total of around 1 million plug-in vehicles now registered in the UK. Next slide, please. Charge points should be accessible wherever you live in the UK. This slide shows the scale of the challenge. Government recognizes the need for more equitable distribution and the need for resources dedicated in this area, which is really welcomed. If you look at now, well, last year, 2022, we've got 37,000 total public charge points available, and by 2030, we're expected to have nearly 750,000. So there's a lot of work to do. Next slide, please. Successful transition should result in charge points being easy to find, reliable, and also fairly priced. Currently, if you can plug in, if you've got a driveway and you can plug it at home, it's about 2.5 times more expensive for you to use a public charger. So it disadvantages people that don't have a driveway. The government is also looking for provision to be supplier-led and integrated smartly into our energy system. Also, the market is changing really rapidly. There's a lot of innovation going on, so we need to be open to new ideas and innovation and flexible with any approach that we take. Next slide. We've been working with our West Yorkshire colleagues for the last 12 to 18 months, and we've developed a West Yorkshire strategy. And our key principles are to accelerate delivery, ensure provision is equitable and accessible and reliable. You probably are aware now that that we have a lot of different. Currently, we've got 5 different contracts in Calderdale. We've got 3 different contractors serving our publicly chargeable charge points, our public charge points. So there's several different apps that you have to download in order to use them. They're often broken. So we really have to really step up our game and provide good, reliable coverage all over the borough. Next slide, please. The government are addressing these 3 challenges. They're trying to tackle the customer experience through consistency and provision. They want and recognize that we really have to pick up the pace in terms of rolling out on-street charging, particularly. And they're dealing with the motorway provision. Next slide, please. So the local electric vehicle infrastructure fund has been released by the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles, and it's to support local authorities to primarily install lower powered chargers, and we are expected to in residential areas, and we're expected to leverage in private sector investment. We currently are doing this to the best of our ability through planning gain and collaboration with other West Yorkshire districts in our procurement. Next slide, please. Calderdale currently has 72 publicly available charge points, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but we per capita, we're just behind Leeds. Leeds is leading in West Yorkshire, and we're in second place, so we're not doing too badly. The number and location of future charge points will depend on detailed site selection work and stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. Right, we received it's not, the money's not in the bank yet, but we were told at the end of May that we would get £15 million for West Yorkshire to deliver our electric vehicle infrastructure strategy. Now, 14 million of that is capital, and around $1 million of it is revenue. So we will be employing somebody to support this project, somebody who will sit within my team. We've been developing a West Yorkshire framework with West Yorkshire and the Combined Authority and with the Energy Savings Trust. And we've had support from the Levi team as well. And we're planning on launching that framework this summer. And we've been working with the Energy Saving Trust to develop a site selection tool. So we've got 3 years to deliver our electric vehicle infrastructure. Next slide. Right, so we've already undertaken a very high level site selection process, but a lot more work needs to be done. Councillor Clark, did you want to come in?
No, I'll wait till the end, Mary.
Okay, all right. I've only got a couple more slides anyway. Yeah, so a lot more work needs to be done on the site selection, because the work that was done was about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's based on propensity. So it tends to be in areas where there are wealthier people who can afford to buy an electric vehicle. So we need to revisit the site selection, and because we want more equitable distribution. We also have to ensure that people with mobility issues can have access, that the sites are well lit, and that they're in convenient locations, so that it'll encourage the transition to EV. Next slide, please. So we have had confirmation of funding from OZEV. I have an advert out right now that just went live a day or two ago for a project manager to coordinate the delivery of the electric vehicle infrastructure. A tender process will begin in the next few months to secure a supplier across West Yorkshire. And I think Laura knows better than I, but I think for every £1 that we spend, we'll be leveraging in £3 or £4 of investment from the private sector. And then we'll be concentrating on the detailed site selection in consultation with ward members and customers later on in the year. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that in terms of site selection, it's a little more complicated than I initially thought it would be, because if we don't own the land, then that can create a problem. You don't really want to take if you put it in front of number 13, then number 13 will think, if it's on public highway, the number 13 might think that that's their parking spot, and that can cause some problems. It has to have an electrical supply, and we have to look at what's under the ground. It has to be accessible. So it is quite complicated, but we're moving forward with that, and we'll be sharing that with ward members. And then finally, the last slide is it's quite a big ask, what we have to do. It sounds like a lot of money, but it's not going to really provide the amount of provision that we need. We expect that it won't be quite enough. We want to make sure that all places in the borough have electric vehicle infrastructure. Government has recognized that we need support in this area, and that's really good. We're working closely with our West Yorkshire colleagues and other partners to deliver it over the next 3 years. And like I've said, we'll consider the location and type quite carefully. And so that's the end. So if you have any questions. And Laura, I'm sure, can help. Laura's done most of the work behind this, by the way. She's our expert. Councillor Clark.
Right, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm hoping this is a really simple answer. Right at the beginning, you mentioned having the right charger in the right place. I'm hoping that means that there's a universal charging lead that fits into universal charging points. Is that the case?
No.
Yeah, Laura, do you know? There's no such thing at the moment.
So
Laura, you want to think about it for the future, because everything's going to have to be changed probably, and as it becomes more prevalent, then surely we'll change to something that is universal. It's a bit like everyone changing, like all phones are changing to a Type 3 charging lead. Yeah.
Well, Laura may be able to come in and answer that question, but there is now near field communication. So just like, contactless cards where you can just tap, where, you may not need a hose that connects you to the charger. There's also where the car can communicate with the charger. So all you'll have to do is pull up, and you don't even have to get anything. You don't even have to get your wallet out. It just knows that it's a bit like Apple Pay, that sort of thing. So the technology is changing really, really rapidly. But Laura, do you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, so there are a number of different types of charging cables. Some of them you can use with most charge points, but there are also others that you can't. So particularly things like Teslas and the more expensive charge points, they have Chadmio cabling and ports that aren't able to charge many of our smaller 7 kilowatt and 22 kilowatt charge points. But that is changing. You know, they are trying to unify that sort of going forwards and make sure that newer versions of electric vehicles are compatible with most charge points or all charge points.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, before I move on, two things. Ben, can we exit the presentation screen and just have us all back together, as it were?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah. Councillor Kimber, or sorry, Councillor Dickinson, do you want to?
Tell you what, I'm quite happy to watch. Yeah, I'll let you.
Okay, Councillor Kimber.
Tell me if I need to.
Thank you, Mary. Brilliant. So I've got a couple of questions, hopefully really simple. Will it be all under one provider? No.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that's what we're aiming for, because there might be multiple providers across West Yorkshire, but we want consistency in provision. We don't want to have to manage multiple contracts, which is a position that we're in now. And then we want scale so that when we go to purchase, we can buy as many as possible. And we want consistency in terms of access, the apps and that sort of thing. But Laura, I don't know if you can add anything to that.
Yeah, so let me just go through a couple of points. So we're almost finished completing the statement of requirements for a framework, which will allow us to procure 4 or 5 charge point operators onto that framework to deliver our Levi capital scheme to install EV charging infrastructure across the borough. So there's likely going to be 4 or 5 charge point operators that we can select from. And part of the reason for having multiple charge point operators is to ensure that you've got market competition. We don't want to be locked into one provider that could lock us into really high electricity costs in terms of pence per kilowatt hour of electricity. So we're going down the framework option. It's nearly finished. It should be finished by the end of July. We'll be looking to publish it in early August. And that will enable us to procure those charge point operators on our framework to deliver our Levi pilot and our Levi scheme. And just to give you a sense of scale of this, so we have a £1.5 million pilot fund, which has been awarded. And we'll be looking to bring in £2.5 million of investment for that project, which will create a £4 million pot of funding to deliver charging infrastructure across the borough. We have a £14.3 million pot, which has been allocated, and we're going through a stepped sort of bidding process at the moment to refine and hone what our project will look like for that fund. And we'll also, for that, use our framework to procure the charge point operators that will be delivering on our Levi main fund. And just in terms of a sense of scale, we have 72 charge points, as Mary said in her presentation. According to the Department for Transport, for Calderdale specifically, we need to be looking at about 2,000 charge points across the borough. So there's quite a lot needed. With a £4 million pot, assuming that we get that private sector investment into that, plus a £14.3 million pot, which might give us a further 15 million, may create a 30 million pot. That's only going to pay for about 250 charges, and we're already up to about 30 million or so. We'll probably get about 250 charging locations for that amount of money. So there's still a long way to go. And the programme is due to be delivered sort of over the next 3 to 4 years. Thanks.
Okay. The only reason I ask is because I must have 10 apps on my phone that are each loaded with money for various different chargers that I've used all over the place, which I feel is quite wasteful. Because you have, I don't know how it's going to work for us in Calderdale. On most of the chargers that you use, you load them with money, and then next time you go in, you've already got money on there, so you just plug in and go, which obviously makes sense if you've got one provider. So that's the only reason I mentioned that. I hadn't thought about market competition and things like that. So that's fine.
Can I just come back on that point, please, Katie?
Yeah.
So in terms of the Levi pilot and the Levi funds, more so with the main pot of money, they're putting the condition that it has to be contactless on there. So it is changing, and the funding that's coming out is trying to funnel that into making sure that future charge points will be contactless. So that's to get around the problem of everyone having so many different apps for so many different charge points. It'll take a while for that to come through though, but that's the aim. There aren't so many models of charge points on the market at the moment that have that contactless option. So we'll see how that works.
But even some of the suppliers now are saying that even contactless is going to be old technology within a year or two, which makes it quite challenging. I think Councillor Wood, I think you were next.
So I had one other small question. Sorry, is that okay? Just before we move on, is that all right?
Of course, I'll go me. I don't know about the chair. Yeah.
Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. The other thing is, well, at the moment, you can only park for an hour. Is there options to be able to do that further once you've got more charging points?
That's not a question I can answer because parking charges, the operational side sits with Andrew Pitt's team, and it's a cabinet decision on whether or not we will allow free parking. Now, I personally, I don't know whether I should say this or not, but I have been recommending against allowing for free parking because when you look at the carbon footprint of different modes, of course, walking, cycling, and bus provision has the least carbon footprint, but EV is still a pro-car policy that does emit, if you look at the full life cycle, is still emitting carbon and other emissions. And so we don't want to encourage people to use it. We want people to switch, but we'd like people to buy a car but not use it very often. And so I think that allowing free parking is sort of sending out the wrong message. But
Mary,
it's not a decision.
Mary, sorry, it wasn't free parking that I was talking about. I'm more than happy to pay, and I think we should have to pay. It's parking and it goes to other pots of money.
Did I misunderstand your question?
Yeah, sorry. It was if at the moment you can only park for an hour, and it's quite restrictive. Whereas you can park
when you're charging.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
I think that one will probably come back to because there's two different arguments for and against that. Obviously, we want to turn them over so that people have the maximum opportunity to charge, and we also have a taxi fleet as well, who we want to be encouraging movement towards EV vehicles as well. But I don't think we'll probably answer that one today, but maybe that's something we think about and come back to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the residential chargers will be low. There'll be slow charges where you probably wouldn't have a restriction. You'd probably be able to stay, charge all night. But yeah, that's all up for grabs during the procurement, and we'll have to be very careful on our consideration and what our objectives are, and agree those with members as we move forward to make sure that we absolutely get the best quality and the best provision and the right provision in the right areas.
It's probably worth mentioning about the AUX project that happened about 3 or 4 years ago, which was just when COVID, which was the on-street residential charge point sort of program, which helps us deliver some of these earlier ones. So this is about, I guess, having a suite of different stuff that does different things that make sure you can have longer stay or or shorter stay, your turnover, and all of these projects are, all of these funded sort of government projects have different, very specific areas on them, and this is Levi as opposed to Orcs, so probably just worth mentioning that.
Sounds like this is something that's a process of evolution as much as anything else. What I'm picking up from what you're saying. Can I move on to Councillor Ahmed, and then Councillor Bradburn, and then Councillor Wood, with responses in between whilst. Thank you.
Yeah, so I've just got a general question around the distribution of the charging points, because you know, it's just something I want to know for myself, which is if the charging points will, you know, predominantly be in, you know, more affluent areas, or, you know, there'll be an equal distribution into, say, you know, sort of more deprived areas, because I would be somewhat concerned if, you know, people living in deprived areas weren't, you know, sort of future-proofed, for example.
Well, absolutely. We want equitable distribution in all areas, and it's the way that we want to ensure that is when we go out to tender. So they say that, just for example, that the infrastructure might be used heavily in Ripponden and Hebden Bridge or in Lightcliffe, because they're wealthier areas where we're going to get more EVs. Well, they might charge a little bit more there. Well, when we do the procurement, we will say that no, we don't want just charge points in those areas. We want them right across the borough, and you know that will just be written into our tender documents. So we'll make sure that they are distributed equitably. One of my concerns is that we put one in and it's not used. So I think we need to think carefully about the location so that people that are passing through the areas that have a lower propensity to own an electric vehicle will use those charge points. So it's going to be a challenge, but we are determined. It's sort of our number one priority that we have equitable distribution and we don't disadvantage any communities.
Yeah, fair enough. Laura, did you want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, so we've been working with Leeds University with Professor Kelsall, who is working on a 2-month project looking at site identification for West Yorkshire Group. And one of the things that he's been looking at is that how do we make it fair and equitable for our deprived communities and our rural communities, as well as our kind of more densely populated affluent areas. The difficulty that we have with that, as Mary suggests, is that, you know, you could put charge points in very deprived areas and actually they wouldn't get used because people can't afford to use them. So there's a couple of things there. One, in our strategy, we've said that we'll look at hubs. Charging hubs will be prioritised in convenient locations close to residential areas. And the second thing is that we're probably looking at a staged implementation process where areas that are more likely to uptake measures will be considered possibly sooner.
We've lost your video, your audio.
Oh, I can still hear her actually.
Oh, I've lost audio.
Can you still hear me?
I certainly can.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a phased implementation process, because there's no point in spending lots of money on putting charge points in deprived areas if they're not going to be used for another 5 years' time or another 3 years' time. So Professor Kelsall from Leeds University is kind of looking at all that and looking at that. How do we make it fair and equitable? How do we ensure that our deprived communities aren't left behind? What are the parameters around site selection? So that'll give us a better picture once he's finished that piece of work at the end of this month. So that'll help us with our site identification process that we go through next when we'll look at the kind of Levi pilot and the Levi main funding implementation phase.
Yeah, I guess this will filter down as the cars trickle down the second-hand car market. So yeah, makes sense. Councillor Bagborough.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the report. It sounds like you've got a few challenges ahead, and I wish you all the very best of luck with that. So my question, and coming from an adult's perspective, is actually there's people who are disabled who want to install a charging point outside the home who do not currently have a drive. And I think it's a policy at the moment where the council are not willing to put something, a strip across the pavement. So it's something I would really like the council to re-investigate in relation to how can we help those people who are in special circumstances, i.e. disabled, obtain an electric charging point, into the homes, because actually, as you can imagine, it might be feasible for us to go to one of these charging points on the street and be able to walk away for a few hours and come back. But actually, it's more challenging for those with conditions that make it challenging for them.
You want me to come back on that? Or when Mary's gone? Yeah, you're totally right. Due to the narrow roads and pavements, on-street charging can present a lot of problems for accessibility of the footpaths and for other road users in some areas, and it can also further aggravate existing parking demand pressures by reducing parking availability. We are going to have to look at on-street charging in some settings, and that discussion does need to be had in terms of how we make sure that our disability and disabled people can access charge points that are close to their home. I'm hoping that the initial pilot will help us to flesh out some of these barriers, some of these issues, so we can have those detailed discussions around it, so that when we go into the main funding delivery programme, that we would have ironed out some of these issues and had these discussions before we move into that kind of main delivery phase.
I think just to add to that as well, it's probably important to say that ward councillors' roles will be really important in this, in making sure that not just that residents' voices are heard, but that also that we do deliver this, because I think it'd be a crying shame. And I mean, Laura and yourself, Howard, have just outlined some of the concerns that we need to address, but we also need to make sure that whilst we're listening to those concerns, that we're driving up delivery as well, and we don't miss the opportunity to make sure that our wards are well served in terms of that infrastructure. So there's a real balancing point there, I think, and hopefully that consultation aspect of it will help us do that, and look forward to hearing yours and others' voices on that.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Wood.
Thank you. Question I wanted to ask was, do we have any, and this may have been answered, so apologies if it had, do we have any control over what we charge money-wise to actually deliver this? Because I've noticed that, generally speaking, if you want a fast charge, you pay more for it. So you're paying 75p a unit or whatever to do that in like usually a private car park outside Starbucks or something. The public cheap one, the public slow ones, you would expect to be cheaper, but I know the ones I've used in North Arm, for instance, in the public car park are pretty much the same price as a fast charge. Have we got any control over that? Or
I think the only control that we have over it is in the procurement process when we go out and the suppliers bid for the work. But I think that they I will let you come in, Laura. Yeah, I think they have to buy the electricity, so there's only so much that they can do, and they've got to make a profit, and they've got to be able to maintain this infrastructure. So it's probably not a big window unless we subsidize.
Yeah, it's usually, as an electric car user, I would expect it to be cheaper for a slow charge. So if I park in Trinity in Leeds, for instance, they've got slow chargers there that are a lot cheaper than you know,
The
100
fast ones.
100
Yeah.
megavolt, 100 kilovolt, is it? I can't remember anyway. The really fast ones that you get, you know, motorway services, etc.
So that
But
is
I've
demand
not-
management, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously the
Thanks.
infrastructure is much cheaper. You know, if you're going to put a big 100 megavolt, kilowatt, whatever one it is, in, you've got to have a huge electricity supply into that. Whereas if you put in several 7 kilowatt ones in, that's basically a domestic supply. So there's a big difference in infrastructure. You'd
Yeah, I
expect
would think
to be
it's
cheaper.
the energy provider, it's in their interest to offer it cheaper for the slow charges. But Laura, do you know more on that one, that point?
It depends on the contract is the answer, really. And I know within the framework and within the procurement we're doing for the Levi pilot, we'll be building in quite stringent key performance indicators, and we'll be looking at the pence per kilowatt hour rate that people will be paying for the different size of charge points. As you say, a 7 kilowatt charge point might take you 4 to 6 hours to charge a vehicle up to 80%. A rapid charge point on the motorway services you can charge within an hour, but it takes up a lot more power, and it costs a lot more to install. It's important to point out that the Levi funding is focused on those smaller charge points. So it's the 7 kilowatt ones, it's the 22 kilowatt ones rather than the rapid charge points. So the focus is more on the smaller charge points where people are looking at charging overnight or charging sort of near to their home. It's not looking at charge points for destination charging.
No, I appreciate that. I'm just on the cost thing, I wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
I would really hope we're not going to be expecting people who can't afford a charge point or can't get a charge point at home to be paying 75p a unit or like that. I know it's what the municipal ones in North Arran charge or close to that.
Yeah, it depends on the contracts.
I hope we're building that in. That's all I'm saying. That feels like something that we should try and make sure.
We are. It's quite difficult because obviously the charge point operators want to make a profit from these charge points, but ultimately the council will have the contract in place and it will have responsibility to be able to set that price point over and above what the charge point charges. So you can change it, but it will be up to making sure that that's very clear within the contract.
Understood. I just want to try and make sure people don't get gouged, which is what it feels like. But thank you. That's it.
Ultimately, it might move forward so that you know it's being billed to your home energy. You know, you have an account that you just take with you. There's some talk of that.
Okay. Lots of good information there. It'll be, hopefully that's answered your question for you, Councillor Wood. Yeah, excellent. I'm going to bring in Councillor Brundell, and then finally, last word, we'll go to Councillor Kimber before we move on to the final item on the agenda before the work programme discussion. Good evening, Helen.
Was that myself or Katie? Sorry.
Yeah. You then, Katie.
That's fine. Sorry if it's loud. I'm having to take this in Square Chapel. Wanted to pick up on the points around the equal distribution. And specifically, is there a way we can prioritise the areas with sort of worse public transport links? I'm conscious of, for example, Clonone and Portsmouth in my ward, not great public transport. In terms of active travel, there's sort of limits in terms of the roads and what can be done there. Is that something when we're recommending sites that we can kind of factor into the process? And also, this will be familiar for those that are in various meetings with me, but in terms of private renters, I'm aware it's more difficult to get an electric vehicle because you are less likely to be able to, install a point or have one at the house you're renting. Again, is it something that can be factored in terms of areas with a high percentage of renters and that prioritised versus homeowners who install one in their own home? And hopefully you've caught that. If not, I'll pop it in the chat.
No, that's a really good point. And to be honest, I hadn't really thought about that. We want sort of a map of equitable distribution, but of course it will happen over a period of years. And so starting where there is poor public transport links does make sense. And it's a good point on apartment buildings and that sort of thing. And so when we develop our criteria for ruling out, I think the criteria needs to be shared with yourselves so that, we can make sure that it's the right criteria and that we're doing it in the right way. So I think to answer your question, we can do it however we want, but I guess also, well, bearing in mind that the supplier wants to make a little bit of money and so wants a balance of equitable distribution and putting it in places where there's high propensities for people to use it. But they're good points. We'll take that on board.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Finally, Councillor Kimber, then we'll move on.
Thank you. Just a quick one. So not that long ago, I was in a meeting and it was around making travel easier and the use of electric car clubs so that people could hire electric cars. So just on Councillor Ahmed's point about more deprived areas and having the charging hubs, they would come into play in those areas if people were able to hire an electric car from one of these clubs that if that ends up arriving in Calderdale. I'm not sure where they're at with that at the moment, but then that would, the distribution would be easier at that point, because you're then opening up to people not buying their electric car but hiring it on a particular day to get to X, Y and Z or whatever. So those charging hubs would be well placed then in those potentially in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you also, Mary and Laura, for your contribution this evening. There's been a lot of interesting stuff in that, it's a process of evolution for what is going to be a new way of getting around. It's still a new way for getting around for many of us. So it'll be interesting to see what the future holds and how that's rolled out. Looking forward to seeing this one again in due course. I'm sure of it. Onto the second to last item on the agenda, which will be the inclusive economy. Just maybe 1 second, sorry, the full title of it, the Inclusive Economy Strategy Refresh. Can I ask who's going to be introducing this one?
I'm afraid I have the short straw, Chair, because Kate is unwell. So this is an unexpected delight. And I am accompanied by Amy Jenkinson, who I mentioned at the start of the meeting, who is our policy intern this year and is working predominantly on the inclusive economy work, and absolutely fantastic and a really, really great asset to the team. No pressure, Amy. For the rest of the meeting. So Kate and Sian's on leave. So Kate was due to be here with Amy, but what we've got is a presentation. So you'll have seen the report. I'm proposing that we just run through the presentation. Are you hoping, Chair, to finish by 8 o'clock?
I think that's a fanciful notion, really. I'm quite happy to sit it out. I've had my tea, so I'm all right, Jack.
Well, what I was going to suggest was that if we run through the slides, this is really a kind of a heads up that we're doing this work. So the work is going to be undertaken in the coming months. So what we're telling you about is where we're starting from and what the process is going to be. So my suggestion would be that if members want to get involved, there will be opportunities in the coming months. And I would suggest that we come back to scrutiny probably before Cabinet in December time. So coming in autumn with work in progress, if that's acceptable to the committee. And we can also then come again when the final document's produced and we've got the action plan and so on. However you want to handle it. What I want to emphasise is that this is not the only opportunity you're going to get to contribute. So don't feel obliged to come out with lots of insightful comments if you've not had the chance to kind of get to grips with the existing strategies that we've got. So Amy has got the presentation and Ben's got the presentation. I'm hoping somebody can share it.
Does Ben want to try, just because my laptop's a bit funny?
I can share it.
Thank you, Ben. That's great. So feel free to stop anywhere through these. There's 13 slides or so, but they're very brief. And Councillor Courtney may want to add a few words at the end as well.
Can everybody see that?
Thank you.
Yes. Can you? Do you want to put it on slideshow?
I'll put it on slideshow.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So I'll keep moving you on. So if you've gone to the next slide, which just gives you the background to the work that we're doing at the moment. So I'm mindful that some of the members on committee and some of the members in the council were not around when the original economic strategy, inclusive economic strategy, was developed. It predates me. It was produced in 2018 and covers the period up to 2024. My assumption is that the 2024 date is because of the 50-year birthday of Calderdale, and so it was aligning those dates. I don't think the 6 years was particularly important, other than the end in 2024. What obviously happened that nobody foresaw in 2018 was that the significant flood events in February 2019, which really were I don't need to tell you how significant they were. And then hot on the heels of that was the pandemic, which really kind of threw everything up in the air. So I joined the council in January 2021, and one of the first pieces of work that I took part in was that COVID impact assessment and the inclusive economic recovery plan, which was started in 2020, and then we took that to cabinet in 2021. Very much had the same focus, but the increased emphasis on tackling inequalities, resilience and recovery, really obvious. We all saw that the pandemic affected people to different degrees, and those inequalities, and particularly for people, the importance of home and the quality of their housing, their access to outdoor space, the types of work they did, whether they were able to work from home. We know that Calderdale had a high proportion of people who weren't able to work from home and were actually out delivering frontline services, and that had implications all of its own. And just the impact on the borough, and making sure that we were mindful of that and responding to it. So it wasn't a brand new, it's quite a detailed report. There's a lot of data and evidence in the recovery plan, but it really was an extension and an expansion of the work that we'd already done around the inclusive economy strategy. And it just reinforced some of those really important elements of Calderdale's approach. We established the Inclusive Economy Board during the pandemic, and it really started to gather momentum. And I think people really saw the benefit of having those shared conversations where we had representation across sectors. So we had the chambers represented in business, we had the voluntary and community sector, we had the public sector, we had the college, and it gave us a rounded set of people to talk through some of the issues and identify responses, both in terms of the immediate and short term, but also then looking to the longer term and how we might want to do things differently. So the refresh of the strategy, as you would expect, it's 6 years old now. We've had the COVID recovery plan in between, but the world has moved on quite a lot. So I referenced the impact of inflation. We've had the war in Ukraine. We've still got the war in Ukraine. We've got the cost of living crisis. So it feels like even if we weren't due to refresh it, we will probably be refreshing it anyway, just because the world has changed so significantly. If we can move on, Ben, please. So what is an inclusive economy? So one of the conversations I've had with colleagues at West Yorkshire over many years is that tension between growth and opportunity, and then addressing need and making sure that we're not leaving people behind. And I think the pandemic really made us think quite hard about people that were left behind. So it's really important that, I think for Calderdale, it feels like it's really of the place that it is an inclusive economy, and that we make sure that people can participate. And I remember sitting in one of these meetings last year where we talked about the biggest contribution you can do for people to help them live a good quality of life and to live a healthy and productive life is for them to be in work and to be in good work. So it's absolutely fundamental. It knits right across all our other strategies, including our health and wellbeing strategy and our local plan and all of those things. It's about delivering and creating the conditions for growth that benefits the people who live here now and the people that are going to live here in the future. So we do want an economy that grows, but we want an economy that grows in a way that people can participate, that it doesn't leave people behind, that it's a good quality of economy, so it builds a financially and environmentally sustainable future. So it's not growth at any cost. We know that there are tensions between some of our priorities and our agendas, but it's about trying to look at things in the round and make sure that we're making really considered and thoughtful decisions. Thanks, Ben. So the original inclusive economic strategy had 6 key objectives. I'm not going to go through them. I'll just tell you what they are. So there's growth and investment, access to good work, people and places, targeting our efforts, young people and lifelong learning, social value and anchors. We've tested those with the Inclusive Economy Board. We had a meeting in April and did a bit of workshopping. And by and large, people feel that they're still relevant. I think, you know, there's only so many ways you can cut this. And I think we got some really positive response. And I was going to ask Amy at the end of the presentation just to feedback some of the feedback we got from that meeting, because it was a really positive, energized session. And I think people really felt there was lots that we've achieved lots, and some of that is in the slides later on in the presentation, but there's lots more we could do. And it felt like there were some really great opportunities. Do you want to move on, Ben? So what have we delivered? So we've just given a flavour of these across the different strands. So if you move on, Ben, to the next slide, which is growth and investment, you know, we're working really hard on our support for businesses, particularly for startups, and we're just about to go out to recruit what we're calling a young business advisor. That doesn't mean the advisor has to be young. It's about an advisor who's working with young businesses, because we know if we can get businesses to survive through that initial 3-year period, they stand a much better chance of becoming a sustainable enterprise and carrying on and supporting the economy and creating growth and jobs. So we're working closely with colleagues at West Yorkshire, and Heather, who leads that team now following Fiona's retirement, doing a really great job in accessing the funds that are available. We're really starting to think, some of this came from the Corporate Peer Challenge, but it was something that I've been talking about to Kate quite a lot, was around our business engagement. The council has lots of different hats and lots of different interfaces with business. And one of the things I'm really keen that we do is that we really strengthen that conversation with business, and that it isn't just a conversation about what grants are available, it's about what's affecting your business, what your skills need, what do you need to grow and sustain, how do we retain businesses in the borough, all those things, but we need to have that sustained conversation. So I really want to get a really strong business engagement strategy that's broader than the support focus that we've had up to date. We do all the usual things that you would expect around meet the buyer and networking events for businesses, and they're really great. And I think you can't underestimate the value of bringing businesses together and that peer-to-peer learning and sharing of experience. The growth agenda, we talked very much in the recovery plan about housing-led recovery and how important housing was. So we've got lots of programmes that we've kind of referenced here. You'll all be aware of Beach Hill and the work there. It's very visible every time you come into town. We've got the build to rent that's coming at Cow Green, just going through the final process around the land there, and that will be coming forward. And the North Halifax Transformation Programme, where we bundled together 3 different sites and took them out to market to get the best possible solution for each of those sites, and that will be coming forward, delivered by Keepmoor, one of the major national house builders that delivers really good quality housing in lots of kind of regeneration type areas. So a really, really interesting programme of work there. And obviously we've got planning permission for High Street and Hebden Bridge and the Calderdale Land Trust and so on. I've mentioned earlier on about the importance of the existing stock. So we've got the home upgrade grant, HUG 2. We had HUG 1 and we're still progressing those schemes. Really important. You know, making sure that we're improving the fabric of these buildings, but also reducing people's bills. That's so key. This is not just about the fabric of the building, it is about the cost of living crisis. So working really hard to get those home improvement grants out. And the Climate Action Partnership, I think the Scots had to leave because he wanted to go running, but the Climate Action Partnership is really quite productive. Lots of subgroups working on different bits of the agenda and challenging each other, challenging us, making sure that in the action that we're taking, we are taking into account the impact on the climate. And again, there's tensions there around growth and some of the climate impacts, and how do we manage that and reconcile that as we move forward. And I mentioned the local area energy plan that Laura and colleagues are working on around decarbonising the whole of the borough as we move forward into different ways of kind of energy production and so on. So moving on, Ben, to social value and community wealth. So this is in part, it's a large part of this is about how we spend our money as anchor organisations, the large organisations in the borough. How do we make sure that that money is doing the hardest work it can for the borough? So we embed social value into contracts. So some of you may have seen that CISC worked with local schools, they produced toys, went out and taught them, they offer work placement opportunities. CISC are one of the contractors on the highway schemes. And we're doing that right across the board on all of our contracts. We've got Go for Growth programmes supporting SMEs and making sure that we're connecting those supply chains. I mentioned earlier on about the VCSE, that's the Voluntary Community and Social Enterprise Strategy and Community Policy. I really think it would be great for the committee to have a look at that and influence the shape of that as we bring that forward. And we will be doing that, co-producing that with our partners to make sure that it really reflects how we work. We've got the UK SPF programme. Calderdale took a really bold decision to focus that. It wasn't, when we look at the replacement of the European programme, you know, it was a much, much smaller amount of money, and we've got to be clear that we can only, you know, spread the jam so thin. So focusing that on North and Central Halifax, building on the learning from the Park and Worley pilot, really important, and learning lessons that we can then take right across the borough. You will all be aware from the work in your wards around community asset transfers, and the Future Council work resulted in a tremendous number of community asset transfers being progressed, and that was quite challenging, I think, for the teams that were having to do them, and challenging for the organisations that were going through the process. We're still progressing that as a policy, and we are refreshing that policy and trying to make sure that it's as efficient as possible, and that the support for the groups is there when they need it. So working on that, that's work in progress at the moment, and we'll be coming forward in the next couple of months. And then we've got the cost of living campaign. So Sian's team worked very closely with Sarah, who's the lead on the anti-poverty agenda, making sure that we're getting information out to people and doing some of that housekeeping around making sure people are accessing the support that's available, making sure that we're communicating everything that's out there, and just kind of trying to join the dots for people, because I think for people sat at home, it can be quite daunting trying to find where support is available, and especially post-pandemic, feeling quite isolated, especially some of the vulnerable households. So some really important work there, and working with our partners again. So on to the next slide, Cantor. Thank you, Ben. Access to good work. So I think what the pandemic taught us, as I said, that how you worked and how you were employed was really important. And some people were able to adapt, and some organisations were able to flex more than others. So providing support to people who are furthest from the labour market is so important, getting people into work. But looking at pathways and support for key areas, so making sure that there are career routes and progression routes. Health and social care is absolutely key. It's key because we want to make sure we've got healthy communities, but it's also a growth area. So it's a sector where there is some really good work and really good progression opportunities. So there's some work at the moment going on with health colleagues, adult services, and our skills team, looking at how we make sure that really works for the residents of the borough, that they know how to get into an organisation, how to get the right training, and then how to progress. I'm always a bit nervous when we say green skills, because it's kind of it begs the question about what is a green skill, but every time we have this conversation, we say all jobs are going to be green jobs. We need to be green in all our industries as much as we can, making them as sustainable and efficient as possible. And then not forgetting some of the most vulnerable people in our community, and the work that ISCAL does in particular. There are others, there's Project Search, bringing that work together with colleagues in adult services, making sure that those people who need support to be in work, but actually can do really good work when they've got the right support, are able to continue doing that. So there's lots of work going on with ISCAL at the moment, and that review around the experience of people post when they move out of young people services into adulthood. What are their opportunities and their economic life chances? And then we've got the local skills improvement plan. Really challenging, if I'm honest, and the in West Yorkshire being delivered by the chambers, and they're finding it really hard trying to make that connection between the sectors, the businesses, and what skills are needed. And I think it's the conversation we've had before around when businesses, especially when you've got a proliferation as we have in Calderdale, of small businesses and micro businesses, it is very difficult to be looking at your future skills need when you're focused on paying today's bills, keeping people in work, and just keeping the wheels on the bus, really. So the local skills improvement plan, I think, has been quite challenging, and I think we all need to learn from that. So working with West Yorkshire to make sure that we are hearing the voice of business, but we are supporting them to do that look ahead and that future thinking. And again, that ties into the lead from government. We really need strong sector information about how we make those sectors strong and resilient. And the Fair Work Charter, you may, I'm hoping you've heard of the Fair Work Charter that the Mayor launched. Again, that's had a mixed reception from businesses at the outset. I think they felt it was another box that they had to tick, and what did it really mean? But actually, if you get the Fair Work Charter right, it's a real asset to a business. If you were looking for work and you knew that that employer was signed up to the Fair Work Charter, you'd know that you'd be getting good pay, you'd know that you'd be getting good training support, you'd know that you'd have good career opportunities, you'd know that they were just a good employer. So the Fair Work Charter is a really important piece of work, and Deb's, our public health lead, is the lead on that, and she feeds back into my teams, and we just make sure that we're joining all the dots up on all of that work. So the next one is young people and lifelong learning, and the young people one is really interesting. So if Ben, if you want to just jump on a slide. Thank you. So you'll be aware from the census data that there's a real risk that Calderdale's population is hollowing out in the middle, and we need to make sure that we've got a really strong offer for young people. We need really good schools experience. So talking to Julie Jenkins and colleagues there about how our schools are performing, how the academies are performing, how, you know, making sure that families want to send their children to schools in the borough is really important. It's all part of that fabric of the economy and how it all knits together. We've developed a post-16 employment and skills strategy, working together with children's services to make sure that that transition from school into further and higher education is seamless, and that it joins the dots, because we know from feedback from parents and from young people themselves that when they were finishing their GCSEs or when they were finishing A-levels, if they weren't set on going to university, or if they didn't have a particular career in mind, they were a bit lost, really. And so making sure that we're opening up that as transparently and as clearly as possible is really important. And then just picking up on your point, Councillor Dickinson, about CAL and the services they provide, we've got adult and community learning there, and that serves a multitude of purposes. So some of it is that real skilling up, and some of it is that community offer and people kind of introduction to learning, perhaps for people who have not done well academically in traditional settings and are coming back at a slightly later stage in life, not necessarily older people, but you know, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, where you want to reskill and look at other opportunities for employment and just fulfillment as well. We've got the Healthy Holidays work. That has been such a wonderful programme. I have to say, if anyone's not had a chance to get out and see Healthy Holidays work, it's incredible, the services that have been offered through a number of providers across the borough. And I went up to Mixenden and was there with some of the young people there, and just talking to them about the fact that it was really great having a meal. They cooked meals, they were working with the volunteers, and they were taking food home to their siblings, and some of their siblings that weren't on the programme weren't going to get lunch that day. So really important programmes of work that have been undertaken in the last 2 years. And then Multiply, that's one of the UK SPF programmes that's operated from West Yorkshire, and that's about adult numeracy and skills, and that's underway with local providers at the moment. And you know, we know how important those basic skills are. If you've not got good numeracy and literacy skills at a basic level, it's really hard to get into work, it's really limiting. So a really important programme of work there. And then I think nearly towards the end of the presentation, we've got people and places. So if you just jump on again, Ben, thank you. And this is really about the environment that we operate in, the landscape, the towns, the villages, and so on. We know we've got we've secured the investment through the Towns Fund and Future High Streets Fund. We've got the Levelling Up Fund. All of those things are really important. They all come with their own challenges, as I'm sure anybody who's on the town boards will tell you, but a huge opportunity, and absolutely transforming those towns in the next 3 years. It's going to be fantastic to see those projects come to fruition. I don't need to tell you about the impact of the profile of filming in Calderdale. It's just absolutely off the scale. And I think what's really, really interesting is that the majority of the programmes and the films that are being filmed in Calderdale, you really get a sense of the place. It's not just a kind of a backdrop, it is, you get the sense of Calderdale, and I think that's been really fantastic. And anybody who hasn't read Gentleman in Moscow needs to read the book, because I think if you read the book and you see when it's set in the town hall, it's going to be absolutely phenomenal. So some really important work there that just not only is it kind of raising the profile, but it's actually kind of a bit of myth busting about. I remember when we did the Restitched event in Peace Hall, and there were a significant number of people from London who'd never been, London and South East and other places, who'd never been to Halifax, and were absolutely blown away. So some of kind of presence on television and film is changing people's perceptions of the place and giving them a sense of, actually, this is something I'd want to come and see for myself. And then we've obviously got the Year of Culture led by Ian's team and Bobsy, and working in partnership with the Calderdale Creates Network and some really key support from our partner organisations. And it'd be wrong of me not to mention Nikki Chance-Thompson, who also is co-chair of the vice chair of the network at West Yorkshire with the mayor. But really important, and 2024 looks to be a really fantastic opportunity for not just kind of building the profile of the borough, and not just having a great party, but actually having some really fantastic community-led events and some really fantastic opportunities to celebrate everything that's great about Calderdale. So moving on again, targeting our efforts. So we know we haven't got enough money to do everything. We know we haven't got enough hours in the day to kind of be everywhere and on everything, but trying to be really focused and making sure where we need to be in the room, we are, where we need to be influencing, shaping and lobbying, we are, and we work very hard across West Yorkshire. We're very active, very engaged partners. We've just had the confirmation that the local visitor economy partnership is progressing, and that is, you will possibly be aware of the Welcome to Yorkshire history and how Welcome to Yorkshire has been disbanded, and we don't have that Yorkshire brand destination marketing organisation anymore. But what we do have now is this collaboration between the West Yorkshire authorities, really helpfully led by Leeds, because there was a lot of work put in pulling the bid together to kind of submit to government, and that will give us the opportunity to bid for funding to do tourism and visitor economy activities to bring people to the borough and just produce campaigns and those sorts of things that we would like to see. We're still working at a Yorkshire level, but it's quite embryonic, and I think the really important kind of on the ground work is that work that will happen between the West Yorkshire teams. We've mentioned the Fair Work Charter. I won't say any more about that. I've mentioned that we've got the Employment and Skills Partnership, and this is one that's very close to my heart, the Economic Intelligence Officer post. So it might sound a little bit dry to you, but actually we've got lots of data, lots of information, and very little kind of ability to analyse and interpret. So this is really important. I want to make sure that when we're designing programmes and responding to government calls for funding or working with West Yorkshire, that we're focusing on the right things. I think a lot of the time we think we know the answer, and we think we know the answer because we know the place and we've worked here and we've got a lot of experience, expertise and corporate memory and collective memory. But actually, I think we really need to have some of that robust data evidence and the interpretation of that. So that's a really important post for me, and I think that will really help us in the coming years as we look to secure more funds to take forward our ambitions. So the timeline for this work, I'm mindful, country non-Ben. We're doing the scoping now, and this is part of what this is. So this is just to let you know that we're doing it. We're information gathering, we're doing all that horizon scanning that you would expect, and we're going to be sharing the approach with stakeholders in the development stage around July, August, over summer. I know it's over summer. There will be workshops around the objectives, and we're going to get external facilitators to run those on key themes so that we've got some structure and organisation to that and we can capture it effectively. And then over the autumn, September, October, we'll be drafting, and that's when I think probably it's worth coming back and speaking to the committee with a bit of the detail of what's coming forward, and then looking to try and get that to Cabinet early in the new year and the Inclusive Economy Board in December. So moving on, Ben, thank you. The refresh is really, just to kind of in a nutshell, it's about refining our objectives, enabling us to make sure that we're looking at the economy as it is now, the world as it is now, making sure that we've got that forward look and we're not just too rooted in the present or the past. Really emphasising those links between health and wealth, about the importance of well-being and being able to participate in the economy and in education and attain and all of those things. The importance of social value, and we are I'm not sure if everybody's aware, but we are working really closely with colleagues in the hospital trust, the health service, around social value, and that's proving really, really helpful and valuable work. Young people, making sure young people feel they've got a future here and they've got really clear pathways for them, and that kind of commitment to community wealth building and not just growth at all cost. You would expect me to say that we're working with West Yorkshire and we'll be aligning. We absolutely will. We see these very much as nesting strategies. We want to influence the West Yorkshire work to reflect what's important to us, and equally we want to incorporate the West Yorkshire agenda in ours, so that the read across is natural and there's no kind of clunky bits there. And then working strategically with partners, and that's a given. We can't do this on our own. You know, as great as Calderdale Council is, it's even better when it's working with its partners and its communities. So really important that we take this forward in a collaborative way. And we've not put it in here, but I think one of the points I would make is I was with Debs this week and Councillor Courtney around the vision refresh. It really aligns the conversation we're having with the community about their ambitions and expectations and their hopes for the future. So I think it's just a really great time to be looking at this and looking at the vision, and then the year of culture. It feels like there's real energy around the work. So that's it really. That's the end of the presentation, Ben. I think the next slide is really just to ask your thoughts on the overall approach. I'm mindful that I've really run through that very quickly and just kind of probably sent you all either to sleep or put you into shock, and ask you about high-level outcomes you'd like to see. As I said at the beginning, really don't expect you to come out with anything too dramatic today if you don't have anything on the tip of your tongue. And Councillor Courtney, I don't know if she wants to say anything or whether you'd like to hear from Amy what the partners thought was really important at the session that we held in April.
Thank you very much indeed. Can we end the slideshow now, Ben?
Thank you. I'm exhausted.
Well, I was going to say, the next time this comes back, this needs to be early on the agenda rather than late. I'd like to salute everyone in stamina this evening. I think we're doing a cracking job here. And yeah, Sheila, thank you very much for that. Yes, it's easy to get distracted away from the high level stuff, isn't it? I've got a lower level issue I want to raise it on that matter. Yes, absolutely. Sarah, would you like to come in, please? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually just testing out my computer, saying that it can do recognize my hand gesture. So anyway, I was just testing it out. Yeah, so thank you very much to Sheila. I'm really sorry for dipping in and out earlier on. My son was involved in a last minute thing at his school that we had to take him to. So I'm really sorry for not being sort of fully present earlier on. Yeah, and I think in my portfolio areas, there's 3 strategy refreshes. There's the voluntary sector, visitor economy, and this inclusive economy. So it's which is really exciting. I think what I mean, there's lots and lots of work, obviously, and you know, that will be going on, and obviously we really welcome people's ideas and thoughts about this sort of this work. But I think one of the things that I feel about, with not just my portfolio, but I think earlier on, you know, Sheila was talking about the fact that there are so many cabinet members involved in so many different parts of the directorate, and I think this inclusive economy, our inclusive economy sort of plans and the way that we want to work in that way actually touches just about everything. You know, it touches and includes, and just like, you know, health is a part of everything, and housing is part of, touches lots of areas and is really a sort of key to lots of different things. So I think what I would sort of like to say, really just picking up on what Sheila also said about sometimes conflicting priorities. I think it's, you know, sometimes there are going to be different things that come up from different areas that are going to come to you and the board, on this board, and it would be really, really helpful for you to sort of bear in mind of how we can, you know, how you can help to sort of just make sure that some of those bits are fitting together more rather than clashing with each other. Because I think it's really easy, you know, we've seen this in lots of occasions. You know, we have a green and healthy streets policy where we want to sort of get everyone to be, you know, more active, and then we have, you know, sort of you know, but you know, how does that feel for businesses? And we want to support businesses and make sure that businesses are growing, but how and if they're sort of like feeling anxious about, and people are feeling anxious about parking, for example, you know, so it's like it's working out how we can make all that work together and fit that together. And I think through Scrutiny, it's a really, really good way of sort of being able to find some of those points where actually things can, rather than clashing, they can actually fit together. And so I think it's a really, you know, that's a great job for you guys on Scrutiny to sort of help us work out how that can all dovetail, really. So I'm gonna be quiet now, but yeah.
No, thanks for that. It's an important point that you raise, and it is something that needs to be taken fairly seriously. And yes, the world has changed dramatically. So the proposals within the report in terms of what we do next with it, that the refresh needs updating, I would fully support. In that, so much has happened since 2018. And still continues to impact in new and interesting ways. Well, interesting, perhaps cruel is perhaps the better word to use if we consider what's happening in the east of Europe at present and the global impact that's having. But yeah, thank you very much indeed. Members, I know it's late, and I know that you'll be wanting to do other things with your time, and that's a fair shout. But does anyone have anything that they want to bring to the table at this point? It is something we will need to look again. I'm looking at the diary for either December or January, depending on the timescales and the programme that's been laid out in the timetabling. I think it does deserve our serious attention. So I'm keen to bring it back. But does anyone else have anything they want to offer before I make my small point? No one's right. Okay, fair enough.
I've bored everyone out, Chair. I'm really sorry.
No. I'm sure you haven't. I was very pleasantly engaged with all of this, and this is a big thing I could keep carrying talking about it, I'm sure. The bit that I was looking at specifically was on page 39 on my report on there. It talks about the local area energy plan. I was pleased to hear about you talking about decarbonising and how we can start introducing things. Now, I've been banging on about it for a while. In fact, since I was elected back in 2018 as well, funnily enough, about the possibility and a piece of work being done to investigate the feasibility really of building weirs in the river for microgeneration, for hydropower. I'd like to try to bring a little bit of pressure to bear in that regard. It may not be a feasible thing to do, but in terms of decarbonising, and it can be done sympathetically from an ecological point of view, it's something I'd like to see investigated at the very least, if not brought to bear.
Councillor, can I just respond, because that's an issue. I've had that conversation around the potential, bearing in mind the role of water in the borough, if you like. That is there something we could do to harness it? It is really technically challenging to get the right circumstances with the right flows in the right places. But I'm more than happy to take that away and have that conversation and come back with a more considered response on that. But it is quite a challenging proposition, really, in terms of the conditions that you need in order for it to be a viable solution. But I will come back on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be grateful for that. It's just that my thoughts on the matter is the Victorians managed to overcome it. I'm sure we can. So, yeah. We've got. In fact, Laura, did you want to come in before I bring in Councillor?
I thought Laura had gone. If I'd known Laura was here, I'd have hauled her in.
All right. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Just my ears just pricked up when we started sort of talking about hydropower.
Well done.
So, yeah, I'm currently developing a local area energy plan for the borough, which is producing a 3D digital map or a digital twin of all of the buildings, all of the energy assets, all of the solar PV, all of the wind turbines, and mapping all of those assets in a 3D model, and then looking at future scenarios, future interventions, and where we want to put measures to decarbonise our buildings and to help us reach our net zero targets. And within that, I know Polly from the ATC has done quite a bit of work on looking at weirs and hydropower, along with my colleague Sam Saxby in the climate and environment team that I work with. So We've got a lot of really good data, but the economic case doesn't stack up in the current market. But I will be pulling all of that hydro data that we've currently got into the local area energy plan and looking at community renewables and what is actually feasible when we get further down the line with that. So yeah, I'm pulling it in. Whether we'll be able to develop anything for that in the short term, I'm not so certain, because currently the economic case, the commercial case doesn't stack up for it.
Yeah, okay,
Thank you.
that's noted. I appreciate that. I'm saddened to hear it, but yeah. So it looks as though, in terms of the main body of the work tonight, before we get on to the work programme, it goes to Councillor Holdsworth. Sorry, I think I managed to mute myself whilst I was finishing off there. Yeah, final word to Councillor Holdsworth. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. It was a quick question, really, about flooding. There's been a lot of consideration about the reintroduction of beavers in areas where flooding is prone. And I wondered if this was something that we could reconsider in Calderdale. They're very good at doing the pools, the blocking, and the water. What do you think? Is this something that we could look into, Sheila?
Councillor Holdsworth, I will raise it with our natural flood management team, because it feels like a natural slow the flow activity. Katie, Councillor Kimber, may be better informed than I am on beavers and dams.
I'm just frantically trying to find the post where, so within Slow the Flow, we've explored beavers at length, and a couple of our team are extremely up on this. And I know you mentioned it when we were doing the Vision 2024 stuff the other day. So I'm going to put a link in the chat for you to have a look at why beavers are not suitable in Calderdale, if that's okay. I'll pop it there in a second. Is that all right? I know it is complicated and I don't have all the answers, but it is something that we looked at, and I know other areas do it, but our landscape is not suited to it. So it is. I know it's disappointing. I can see your face, but I'll pop it in the chat for you, the link, and you can have.
It's the habitat, isn't it, Councillor Kimber? It's just not suited to them. So
it's not suited, and it's a shame, because I'm with you on it. Absolutely. There we go. It's in the chat for you. All right.
Thank you very much.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed to Sheila and Laura for your sterling efforts this evening, and Amy as well. Yeah, well done, team. We've got there. Right. So we're going to move on now to the final item on the agenda, which is the work programme. I've just been having a quick look at it as well. So this is where Ben comes in. Now, I was looking at, especially with regard to this bit with the inclusive economy, Ben, in terms of bringing that back, but possibly shortly before it goes to cabinet. I wonder if that might be the better idea. Sorry, is Sheila still there? Yes. Don't know if you can still hear me, Sheila, if you're there. Would you recommend that we have a look at this before it goes back to cabinet? So that would be in December, I suppose.
I think it would be helpful. I think it would give you the opportunity to influence the content. I don't think you need to. There are workshops that you're more than welcome to attend, and it may be that if we send you the details of the workshops, the committee can, decide to do those. And we have a kind of a long stop date to come back here in October, say, with the shape of where we've got to. But it may not be the finished product, but it would be very much kind of on its way. So you've still got the opportunity to feed in.
Right, Brill, yeah. I'm just having a quick look at our work programme as it stands. October, parking review, winter preparedness, year of culture preparedness.
We could definitely bring it in October, because parking review will have been covered by the call-in.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that is going to be a few officers work. Right, okay. Yes, that might no longer be leaded, as you say. October then. Right. Does that sound sensible to everybody else? Let me just see your happy, shiny faces. There we go. Does that sound sensible to everybody else? Yeah. I think it might be worthwhile considering the workshops. I'm hopefully some day that I can feed into the. I mean, I can come along as well to one or two of them. It's an interesting area, right? Brill. Okay, we'll combine that as well then. Good. In that case, as it currently stands, we're meeting again in August, isn't it? To have a look at the climate change service plan and priorities, the planning improvement plan. Well, Sheila, you'll be back again for that one. And post 16 arrangements in September. Yeah, you can see it on there on the agenda. I don't know why I'm reading it out loud.
Chair, it's possible that the item on post 16 transport arrangements could be folded into a review, into a CYP agenda item, because CYP are looking at send and they're also looking at transition.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to send that across to them if it's better suited over there.
I think it fits better with their work program.
I think you have a point. So that gives us scope there to consider something else in the sector program if anything interesting turns up. But yeah, I think as it currently stands, we've got scope to investigate other things as well. We've got Councillor Brundle's suggestion for the biodiversity net gain, which could be joined up, I suppose, with the strategic planning discussion as well, I suppose, with at the same time in January there. So yeah, good. Okay, so far so good. What are everyone else's thoughts on this? Any input? No, I think everyone's past it, 8:30. I think it's time to go home, isn't it? Right, okay, so if everyone's content, thank you very much indeed, all of you, for your sterling efforts and for your contributions. It's been well, I don't mind these meetings going on a bit, actually, I'll be quite honest, because they're usually really interesting, and I like to have that depth and breadth that these sort of longer discussions allow for. So I hope you don't mind that indulging me in this one. So take care of yourselves, and we'll see each other again soon. Thank you very much indeed. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.